All right, it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker today, Brian Barry. I asked Brian to give me a little bio, so he wrote down a few things, and it's so good I'll just kind of read to you. Things I didn't know. He says he has 3 graduate degrees, including a PhD in psychology from South Connecticut State and Yale Child Study. He taught at Yale for 7 years, spent 25 years in special education. 10 of these years were with early childhood, 15 in the inner city. He has 3 adopted daughters from Colombia. Isn't that something? He goes to Colombia and has adopted 3 children, has raised them, and now adults. He works in early childhood and in human trafficking in Colombia, Bolivia, Cambodia, and Thailand with his wife Nancy, who does that work from a wheelchair. And so he's left out a couple of things. He's also a very gifted psychic. And he's helped me. He's done health readings with me and with many people. He uses his skills as a psychic for the service of others. And the most important thing about Brian is that he has a heart of gold. Come on up, Brian.
Hey. You always leave me speechless.
Not hard for you, Brian.
Well, as you know, I usually choose my topic on the plane between Charlotte and Norfolk, but not this time. I actually chose it a couple of weeks ago, when we all had reason to turn our thoughts to the possibility of war. So my topic today is war and the soul. Don't be anxious, it won't be heavy, and we will not touch on politics. This is about our souls. It's about finding life, and it's about dealing with issues that sometimes get to be a little too big for us and a little too heavy. So I'm going to tell you the stories of 3 people. 3 people who came for readings, and I'll keep it short. If you want to read the full versions, I have finished my book. It's called A Guide for Channels, Healers, and Helpers. And these 3 stories will be in that book. I'm going to tell you first about Alicia. This is a recent reading, so I can't actually say to you she's all healed. She's on the way. She's 32. She's been teaching yoga for 7 years. She's an athlete. My wife Nancy brought her to me because she heard that she was in difficulties, and she had once been Nancy's student. Alicia had a boyfriend who was a veteran of our wars in Iraq, and they went trekking together in Latin America about 8 months ago. They were having a wonderful journey, and he thought he would add to their joy by buying some of the local drugs. He had a bad episode, and he beat her so badly that the bones in her face were broken. So she was recovering from that still when I talked with her. She was also recovering from the death of her sister, who fell from a rocky spire in Wyoming about a year ago. So she said she was depressed. I honestly think the nickel word will do. She was sad. And she didn't quite know how to turn her yoga tools to the challenges in front of her. She's a good athlete, beautiful yoga, I would have to say, performer, but somehow in this yoga career, she had never really gotten into the habit of prayer. And most of the reading concentrated on prayers for her. Prayers for her to make for Jack, which wasn't easy, for her sister, and although she's been a yoga teacher all these years, she had never thought about what happens after death, never thought about reincarnation. So she did pray for her sister and felt her presence in the course of that reading, and felt that her sister was, and these are the words that came in the reading, reassembling her body of light. It's not a phrase we use very often, but sometimes when death is abrupt or violent, our body of light is scattered. And we have to put it back together again in order to function, I'll use the easy words, as men and women in the heaven worlds when we find ourselves there. And that's the work her sister was doing. And so Alicia came away with a way to pray for her sister, and simple forgiveness to pray for in the case of Jack. She was also told, henceforth, to walk with men and women of peace. And that was not spelled out. I was hearing to walk with men and women of inner peace. Not talking about outer life commitments or careers or any of the obvious connotations to men and women for peace. And she has embraced that. Her depression has lifted. I know that. Is she healed? I don't know that. That's an inner question. So I'll leave Alicia there. This is something still in progress, of course. And we'll move on to Walter. Now, Walter's been gone from this earth for quite a while. He died in the Vietnam War. He was a flyer, and his plane went down in a trackless jungle. And there was really no reliable report of what happened or where his remains were, and there still is not. But one of his loved ones came for a reading because it's been hard to pray for with all those unanswered questions. And I'm not a medium. Occasionally a soul comes through, and that happened with Walter. Walter appeared confident, pleased to be there, pleased to be in touch with his son, and told us how he had prepared through many lives and been a warrior for many lives, and stepped back for a moment, and some of his comrades came and said, this is a man who's been an unselfish warrior, not a violent man. A man who has gone to war over and over for causes that were right and just, and a man who has no regrets, not about how he died, not what he died seeming to fight for. And those who told me this were young men, flyers, to whom he'd been a leader and helper. And they described how Walter had gone about and helped them reassemble their bodies of light. Because when you die violently, especially if you die in the presence of what we think of as radiation, that is very powerful frequencies that are more or less new in the world, it can be very hard to reassemble that body of light. But Walter's task, as he approached it, was not technical. It was simple. Walter's job was to help them recognize the parts of themselves which, as young men, they had not yet met as they lived their lives on earth. So it was a job of reconciliation, not heavy. The parts of themselves were just about the parts you might expect, the parts that were musicians and fathers and loving, positive members of the society. Walter taught me a lesson I, in common with many people in my generation, have had a hard time accepting the warriors in our midst, not least of whom was my brother, who perished in that war too. He helped me with that task. Sorry. And a third person, and this is quite a recent reading, only a few weeks old, Sarah, a 28-year-old nurse, who came because she has suffered 4 bouts of osteosarcoma, which is extraordinary at the age of 28. She's been very well cared for. She's a nurse at a major medical center. She's had skilled surgeons. She's had chemotherapy. She's had irradiation. She's coping very well. Sarah is Jewish, had never thought about reincarnation or anything like it. had thought about life after death, but, and you would know this if you met her, she was confident it was going to be all right. She wasn't confident that she could get through another bout of osteosarcoma, so she asked for measures to treat that disease, and we came up with some measures. Some were dietary, some were about health practices, and especially about exercise. She has to learn some special exercise techniques because one of the sarcomas was in the long bones of her leg, and while she still has that leg, it doesn't work very well. And so we dealt with that. And then we had a surprise. Once again, we had an appearance from a discarnate soul. This was a doctor, a physician named Armstrong, an army physician. And he told Sarah that she too had been a doctor whose medical education had been paid for by the army, which was common in the years that this doctor was there. And this doctor was a doctor in the 1950s. And it fell to this young doctor to screen and check afterwards those men, mostly soldiers, but some sailors, who had been in the trenches in the nuclear tests of the 1950s. And this doctor, Dr. Armstrong, said of this young doctor to whom he had been a mentor, he said, well, you, Sarah, as the man that you were at that time, condemned yourself because you knew so little about radiation and accepted what you were told and have felt that you didn't do such a thorough job in examining these men. And so you remained with them over the years, and he too, by the way, was in the trenches doing those tests. And he too died of sarcomas caused by the nuclear exposure to the radiation in those blasts. And so he said, Sarah, you've come back. You've come back not because it's bad karma. You've come back not to meet karma. You did nothing wrong. You did the best you knew. And you helped those men in your way and with the best that you knew. But you came back to study radiation and what it does and how it brings about cancers. And Dr. Armstrong recommended a book I'll recommend to you. I've read it since. It's a book called American Ground Zero. It's not written by a doctor or a scientist. It's written by a photographer who through the 80s and the 90s went all over the American West photographing the victims of these cancers, and there are scores of thousands of them. They're not well known because for various reasons the data has never been collected. But this has especially been painful because these people had children, and the children have the cancers too. Sarah came back this time to study that phenomenon, to develop cures for those cancers and concentrating on those children. She was amazed, and she was particularly amazed because she had just, at 28, taken up that study, starting from wanting to understand what happened to her, but moving quickly into a larger field. Now, you know, when we start reading, we always have a book of life. I've never seen a book of life like Sarah's before or since. It looked like a phone book. It was this thick. There were thousands and thousands of names in it. And these are the souls who have come back to solve these problems, to solve both the problems of radiation exposure and cancer. And it was said of a book of life that she would be in close and constant communication with all of them. And they would bring their healing arts and share them with her in meditation as she did this work. And she accepted that. Is she healed? She does not at this moment have symptoms of cancer. She did have a sarcoma at the time she came for the reading, but it vanished. Honestly, we didn't address it. I didn't pray for it. I don't know why, but it didn't occur to me. But it vanished. And she's going ahead with this study. She stays in touch with me. She works at a major medical center in the Midwest. She's made many connections, and she's joined some organizations, and she's going ahead with this work. So for me, this was a wonderful reading, not because I made a good connection or saw things I'd never seen before, but because she took up the torch consciously and went to work. Honestly, that's the aim of most of my readings. I love it if a healing occurs. They do sometimes. I often love the beauty of the stories and the complexity of the web that the karmic weavers weave. And I want to tell you, what the karmic weavers weave is always beautiful. If there are some hard times in karma, it's meant to be a passing thing. The end of the karmic story is always a joyful one. I'm sure that it will be for Sarah. I'm sure that it will be for Alicia. And they have somewhat ordinary earthly lives to live, but they've been renewed because they listened to something that was outside their usual experience and accepted that as the voice of Spirit. Well, very few things in my life as a channel make me happier than that. Even though I too have an ordinary life and I'm an ordinary man. I wanted to share those three stories with you today because each in its own way sheds some light on war, which up until now has been part of the human condition. There's no change in that apparently immediately ahead, although we all hope there will be and we all pray that there will be, and this is a nonpartisan prayer. No one I've ever known embraced war and enjoyed it. I don't think those people, if they ever did, exist anymore. I told those stories because God forbid that war should come and we find ourselves involved, although of course we are involved if there's war on the planet anywhere. Those are our brothers and sisters. But if that happens and our hearts sink, then we need to stand up and be strong and rise up bright and shine our lights again. I'd like you to think of these three stories. The karmic weavers can handle war too. And they shall. And I know that we shall. I think I've probably finished the talk in record time, so I'd like to take us once again into the silence. There's no one in this room who hasn't been touched by war. I know that. And for most of us, that's been an experience of loss and questioning. So let's close our eyes for a few minutes and offer first the kinds of confident, light-filled, joyous prayers that we know so well how to offer for those we know who have suffered due to war. We're starting this meditation with that prayer, and I'll leave you in silence for a minute or two while you make it. And now let's enter the silence and feel for ourselves the love that streams to us and fills us and will not disappear or even be diminished if conflict comes to us again in this country. And let's remember that if that happens. And let's feel too the angels, the loving supports, the karmic weavers who heal the fields and the victims of war. They do a wonderful work. In many ways, it's a very human work. we can understand it. Let's feel their presence here. Let's let it fill us. And if you have wounds for more, let it heal you too. And without opening your eyes yet, bring your mind and your sensations back to this sanctuary, where in fact we worship the Prince of Peace. And count on him to get us through these kinds of passages. And give thanks too for the karmic weavers and those who recover, those lost on the battlefield, whether they're combatants or civilians of all ages. And let's pour out to them gratitude and our energy and support for the work they do. And pray for peace. Not just for us, but for everyone. War is man's invention. It's not God's. Just another one of those erroneous institutions that man has created. And let's pray that we all leave it behind. And that will do it for me today. Thank you.